Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view on controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history. It's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is my brother, Shaquan Battle.
Yeah.
And to the right of him is our father, Jerome Battle.
What's up?
I appreciate all the love and support we've been getting on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and even Facebook a little bit. A post went viral on TikTok talking about John Thompson. A Black History Month leader, John Thompson, giving him his flowers for, telling Rayful Edmonds, stay away from his players when it came to Alonzo Mourning. What he did with Patrick Ewing, after he was going to North Carolina, seeing, of course, a cross being burned in North Carolina and the KKK. And, Dean Smith told him, you might want to go to Georgetown, play for John Thompson. And first African-American coach to win a Division I national championship. He also, Allen Iverson credits him with being the person that saved his life.
That's right.
After he was incarcerated and then going to Georgetown and then changing the NBA forever.
That's right.
And a lot of people commented that was from the DC area. And a lot of people was like, yo, I'm a fan of Georgetown because, my father was a fan of John Thompson and then I became a fan. So that's actually how I became a Georgetown fan, because you're a Georgetown fan.
That's right.
And I began to just love the culture, even from John Thompson to his son, to John Thompson III. And we kind of wish we got back there to it. But there was a few people who commented, it was like, yo, we treated Georgetown like an HBCU. We didn't even know white people went there.
Yeah, and the irony of it is, before John Thompson went to Georgetown, there was no black players at Georgetown. Before he went to Georgetown as a coach, there was no black players. Prior to 1971, they didn't have any black players ever in the history of Georgetown.
It's crazy.
So when he went there, his whole goal was to recruit black basketball players. Mm-hmm. And a lot of other coaches didn't like the fact that he only recruited black players.
Yeah.
And he says, if you look at the teams that make the NCAA tournament, you have 68 teams that are recruiting white-only players.
Yeah.
Right? He said, so if I'm recruiting black players, what's the difference?
Right.
What's different than Bobby Knight and what he's doing? What's different than what John Wooden did?
Yeah.
Wooden did? What's the difference? And he only recruited black players.
That's dope. Shout out to Big John Thompson and what he accomplished at Georgetown.
Absolutely.
He
was still there.
Yeah. Where would y'all like to start?
When I go, I'm gonna go for a minute. So I don't know if you want me to start.
Set it off.
I want to talk about something that I've been hearing lately, and I'll get to the actual post in a minute. But it's something that I read about. It was basically talking about, why does race matter? Why do every time something happens, we bring up race? The first black, the second black, the only black, no blacks. Why do we always bring that up? So I'm gonna give some information first, and then I'm gonna get to the post, right? And I want to get to the question that people always ask is, why does race matter? And then some of this is going to be some social studies and a history lesson in government for some people. So just want you to track with me. Google some information. Don't always just take our word for it, okay? So the United States Senate consists of 103 senators. That's 2 from each state plus 3 from the District of Columbia. Mm-hmm. There have been over 2,000 members of the United States Senate. And of that 2,000 plus, only 14 have been African American. In 1992, Carol Moseley Braun became the first African American woman elected to the U.S. Senate and the first African American Democrat senator and the first female U.S. senator from the state of Illinois. Of the 14 African Americans who were ever elected to U.S. Senate, only 4 were females. Out of 50 states, only 9 even had an African American senator. Currently, there are only 5 black U.S. senators. Lisa Rochester from Delaware, Angela Alsobrook from Maryland, Raphael Warnock from Georgia, Cory Booker, who we love, from New Jersey, Tim Scott, who we don't love, from South Carolina. The House of Representatives is fixed by law at no more than 435 proportional, representing the population of 50 states. There have been over 11,000 members of the House of Representatives, with only 188 being African American. Of those, 6 were from the District of Columbia. Since Shirley Chisholm was elected as the first African American female to serve in the House in 1968, there have only been 45 black women total. Mm-hmm. We're talking about in the history of the United States now. Mm-hmm. All right. Currently, there are 62 African Americans serving in the House of Representatives out of the 435. 32 of the 50 states plus the Virgin Islands has elected an African American. That means there's still 8 states that have never elected one. Mm-hmm. During the founding of the federal government, African Americans was consigned to a status of second-class citizenship or enslaved. No African American served in the federal elected official before ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870. So the 15th Amendment is one of the amendments that most people never talk about. Mm-hmm. In fact, on this podcast, we've only talked about it a few times. Mm-hmm. And what that amendment does, basically, it prohibits the federal and state governments from denying any citizen the right to vote because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, which is huge. Currently, let me back up. My computer's on the blink. Currently, there are only one African American governor, which is Westmore, who we love, governor of Maryland, who is also Maryland's first black governor and only the third black governor in American history, with Douglas Wilder of Virginia being number 1. And then there was DeVal Patrick was governor of Massachusetts. And then David Peterson, who was the lieutenant governor in New York, who ended up serving 2 years as the actual governor when the original governor was ousted. There's only been 15 black lieutenant governors, with 5 of them being black females in the history of this country. There are currently 143 African American mayors across the United States. Of the approximately 1,600 plus mayors of cities and towns with a population of more than 30,000 people across the country, 433 of the active mayors were women, with only a small portion of those being black. Mm-hmm. In 2024, little black known history fact, Tulsa, Oklahoma elected the first black mayor. Surprising. That was surprising to me. Mm-hmm. And in Alexandria, Virginia, elected the first black woman mayor. Mm-hmm. There are over 10,000 African American elected officials currently serving across the country, where in 1970, there was only 1,469. Now, I'm going to get to the post. What I saw a post that talked about how many offensive coordinators, black offensive coordinators are in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And everybody was basically saying, what difference does it make? Why does race matter? They're picking the best person for the job. Mm-hmm. There you go again. You guys always want to bring up race. All these different things. And there was comments from both sides. But there was one comment that stuck out to me. And I said, at first, when I first read it, I was like, I disagree. But then I kept reading it over and over again. And I said, whether I agree or not is irrelevant, it makes sense. Okay. And I'm going to tell you what he said. I'm not going to say the person's name because I don't want this person to get some unwarranted resistance and people start sending nasty messages to this person. So honestly, I feel many former players don't make great coaches because they expect greatness from the players because they played themselves. Mm-hmm. And the rules are constantly changing. It is usually the D3 white guy that has spent his career having to rely on smarts and other things to be able to even compete to make the best coaches. When you are able to get by on athleticism and dominance and skill and talent, you honestly have to learn the ins and outs to become a coach. Not to mention most offensive coordinators are former quarterbacks and working up from a quarterback coach. And unfortunately, most of the quarterbacks from the past are white. So I'm sure in the next 10 years, we'll be seeing a lot more black offensive coordinators. when I first read that, I was like, and then I read it again. Some good points.
Okay, I'm not mad at it.
Some good points. If you think about most of the offensive coordinators or even head coaches, because most head coaches were defensive coordinators, not offensive coordinators, right? Most of your offensive coordinators were previously quarterback coaches. And they were quarterback coaches who played quarterback, whether it was in high school or college or even at some point in the NFL, who weren't actually starters. And if they were, they weren't great, but they worked hard. Now, this doesn't mean that your black athletic quarterbacks don't work hard. That's not what that means, because there are some that did. But let's look at Michael Vick, right? Who just got a head coaching job at Norfolk State University. As a quarterback, he worked hard, but he did have a ton of athleticism, right? Do we think that he was a brilliant mind at quarterback? Probably not. But we do believe that he was smart enough to learn plays and that he played at a high level mainly because of his athleticism, not because he was picking apart defenses with pinpoint passing based on play design. That didn't happen. That's just being honest. That's not hating. That's not minimizing what he accomplished. That's just facts if you haven't watched him. I'm not talking about for people that read about Michael Vick. I'm talking about people who watch Michael Vick.
Because that was a problem in Atlanta for a couple of years.
Absolutely.
It didn't seem like he was learning the schemes.
Exactly. So when I thought about this, I said, I can't argue with that. And the fact that you have more black quarterbacks in the NFL than ever before, two who met in the Super Bowl this year. So what he said, yeah, I can, when you first read it, you're like, oh, he's saying that black people aren't smart. That's not what he's saying. We all said on this podcast, hard work outdoes talent any day. Right? But if you get somebody that's talented and they work hard, then God knows what you're going to get from that. So I wasn't mad at that. So when people say color doesn't matter, you still have to take in consideration why that white quarterback coach got the opportunity to be an offensive coordinator.
Right.
You have to take, because let's use your guys' cousin as an example, Byron Leftwich, who proved himself as a quarterback and been really good as an offensive coordinator.
Because he didn't have the athletic ability.
Because he didn't have the athletic. He worked hard. What position does he have right now today?
No. And that is the only problem with some of that rhetoric, is the fact that there has been black people or black coaches who have been more qualified.
That's right.
To be in that position. And I'm not even talking about former players, because there is a hierarchy with being a quarterback's coach, a running back's coach, a wide receiver coach, to being, because Byron Leftwich started as a quarterback coach, and then you go to an offensive coordinator. Same thing with running back coach or wide receiver coach. And nothing different on the other side of the ball when you're a lineman coach or linebacker coach, and then you become defensive coordinator.
That's right.
There is a hierarchy. But when you look at somebody like a Tony Dungy, who brings in Mike Tomlin and brings in, what's the head coach that was the coach for the Bears when they went to the Super Bowl?
Lovie Smith.
Lovie Smith. All of those are fruits from his tree, because Tony Dungy put them in a position that
That's right.
white people wouldn't have put them in.
That's right.
So
opportunity is important.
So, and that was one of the reasons, and not to be all over the place with sports, but that was one of the reasons why people were mad at the fact that Steve Nash got hired, because that same rhetoric goes towards Steve Nash too.
That's right.
Because he was athletic, and then he had a lot of physical abilities that didn't create schemes. So then you have him getting opportunities over Wes Unseld Jr.
That's right.
Or Bickerstaff.
That's right.
So he got that head coaching job based off of him playing. So it does go both ways sometimes.
It does.
And not to cut you off, again, you can go back and look at somebody like a Tom Brady, or who went straight from playing to get in the commentator position, when there's been people who are journalists. There are people who...
But we know that's about popularity. That's about popularity and
true.
Ratings. You bring in Tom Brady, who to some people he's the GOAT, right?
Right.
So that's about ratings. But let me go a little bit further. Currently, there are 1,696 active players in the NFL, not including the 17 plus players you can have on the practice squad times 32, right? So 1,696 approximately. 900 who are black. That's a little more than 53%, right? Currently, there are only 4 black head coaches. Your man.
And one of them want to get fired
Yep.
after he hasn't had a losing
Yep.
season. They've been crap for him to get
Your
fired.
man, Mike Tomlin,
Shout out
Pittsburgh, who was a playoff team.
Black and yellow.
Todd Bowles, Tampa Bay, playoff team. DeMarco Ryans, Houston, playoff team. Raheem Morris, Atlanta Falcons, 1 game away from being playoff team. Right? So the NFL, this is my point is, as I'm getting to slowly but surely, is why race does play a part and why it's important that we talk about it. The NFL created the Rooney Rule in 2003 to increase the number of minority head coaches. The rule required teams to interview at least one person of color before hiring a head coach. It's not saying you had to hire a black coach. It's saying you had to interview. The goal was always to not lower the standard, but give a black person the opportunity to interview to see if they met the standard. If they were qualified the same as you would a white coach.
How do you feel about y'all's coach, Pierce, who just got terminated?
My thing is, the problem you have with any coach, and this is not race associated, in NFL, the goal is to win. And when you don't win, then you're going to be out.
But it was just 1 year, right?
It was 1 year. The problem you had with Antonio Pierce wasn't his fault, but he became the blame guy. Is you didn't have a quarterback. You didn't make a move to get a quarterback. He wasn't in charge of any of that. When you go from an interim coach to the head coach, you got that 1 year. That's it. That's been the history of the game. So I'm not blaming that on race at all.
Okay.
I'm one of the people that said give him a chance, and the players wouldn't play for him. So when you have a coach where players aren't willing to play for, whether they're making business decisions or not, doesn't matter. If they're not willing to play for you, then that's a problem with you. I can't go against things that I've said all the time. When you look at Liberty High School, when you have the best football players and the best basketball players not playing for a coach, is that a player problem or a coach problem? Right? So I can't switch on that. If the best players aren't willing to play for the coach, there's a problem with that coach. You can't have the same problem or wrong with every player. There has to be something wrong with the coach and something wrong with the system. When the NFL is usually both. So you got to gut it. I have no problem with that.
And then also, the other problem with Antonio Pierce was when you come to the media, us fans like it, but when you dog the players in the media and say, hey, there's some people here that's great, that's not going to be here, and that's one of the stars of your team.
That's right.
Nah.
Plus, I think at the end of the day, he was going to be let go eventually anyway because of what he did when he was a college coach. The recruiting violations that they did in paying players. When I know everybody was doing it.
Right.
I understand that. Everybody was doing it. But nonetheless, you lied about it.
Right.
So at the end of the day, when you talk about Chris Webber, a lot of people talk about what happened in Michigan and the scandal, but people don't talk about what doomed him was he lied about it. Right? Once you lie about something, it's a done deal for you. Simple as that. So Tony Dungy is the only African-American coach to win Super Bowl. Right? They in fact expanded the rule for general positions, including general manager, other operational jobs for African Americans and minorities in general, but women.
Technically, he won too because that Tampa Bay team was his.
That's true. That's true. So there's no black offensive coordinators, but you have 13 or 14. I can't remember. 13 or 14 defensive coordinators, black defensive coordinators right now. That's indicative of what the 53% of blacks that make up the league. So that's a really good representation on the defensive side of football. And of the 9 black general managers, Pittsburgh, playoff contender. Los Angeles Chargers, playoff contender. Tennessee Titans, Cleveland Browns, Detroit Lions, playoffs. Atlanta Falcons, 1 game from it. Washington Commanders, that amazing season.
Amazing turnaround.
Minnesota Vikings and Chicago Bears. Right? There are currently no majority black NF owners, but several minority owners. Magic Johnson and Eric Holloman of the Washington Commanders, Melody Hobson, Denver Broncos, along with Condoleezza Rice, Denver Broncos, Venus and Serena Williams, Miami Dolphins, Warwick Dunn, former player, Atlanta Falcons, John Stallworth, former player, Pittsburgh Steelers. So my thing is in every area we're allowed to participate in giving equal and equitable opportunities. And where we include it, we've excelled. Not just in athletics, music, dance, or literature, but also in math and science, medicine, agriculture, aviation. So if color really does not matter, and it should be based on most qualified and in the hiring process or the participation process, you would have never had to have affirmative action. There would have never been DEI programs. The reason you had those is because you did not do that. So let me just get to it. If color doesn't matter, why don't we teach the truth about American history? White America enslaved the African American. Fact. White America has treated the African American unjustly and horridly. Fact. White America has beat, sold, mutilated, raped, deprived, hung, and murdered the African American. Fact. White America has discriminated against the African American. Fact. White America continues to discriminate against African American. Fact. If color does not matter, why do you teach that slavery benefited blacks, knowing it did not? Why do you teach that the first doctor was Hippocrates when the first doctor was Imhotep? Why do you teach Thomas Edison invented the light bulb with no mention of Louis Latimer, who invented the light bulb with the filament that allowed the bulb to last longer, because Edison's version of the bulb didn't last?
Nope.
Why did you teach Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone with no mention of, again, Louis Latimer, who actually drafted the necessary drawings required to receive the patent for Bell's telephone? Why do you teach John Peake Knight, Lester Wire, or even James Hogue or William Potts invented the street light? But you don't mention that Garrett Morgan invented the 3-light traffic light pattern that we use today. If race doesn't matter, why wouldn't you teach that? Why do you teach you don't teach that the first self-made millionaire was Madam C.J. Walker? Why wouldn't you teach that? Why don't you teach that the first home security system was invented by Valerie Brenton Brown, African American? Why don't you teach that Patricia Bath invented a device and method for cataract surgery? Why don't you teach that? If race doesn't matter, why wouldn't you teach that? Why don't you teach that Shirley Ann Jackson was the physicist who invented and patented telecommunications and technologies that led to the groundwork for call ID and call waiting? If race doesn't matter, why wouldn't you teach that?
Right.
And then let's get to the biggest ones. If race doesn't matter, why are you emphatic about teaching Christopher Columbus discovered America? Knowing fully well there were people already here when he got here, and there was many others, including African Americans, that came to this country and had trade routes with this country long before there was a Christopher Columbus.
Right. They passed Africans on the way over here.
Exactly. Why wouldn't you teach that if race doesn't matter? If race doesn't matter, if a basketball team coached by 2 black men are better than your basketball team, and you hate the fact that they outplayed your team, they were better than your team, and they coached better than your team, you want to resort to a verbal altercation and use words like boy.
Here we go.
If race doesn't matter.
Here we go.
If race doesn't matter. As long as I've been a part of the Bedford Recreational Department, I've never seen a white coach get berated by any parent of any color because of the way that the kids played or the way that they coached. But every year I see a black coach get that at some point. Why is that if color doesn't matter? Now, let me get to a couple more real ones real quick. If race doesn't matter, why do most white people go to predominantly white churches where the pastors are white if race doesn't matter? Especially when you bypass a church that a lot of black people went to on your way to your church, if it doesn't matter. And then the big one. If race doesn't matter, why is it so hard for you to fathom that Jesus was black? If race doesn't matter, because it does. It is really hard for white people to understand that their privilege is a form of racism. And when you exercise that privilege in chats, when you comment on podcasts, when you comment on people saying things about Black history, that is a form of you exercising your discrimination in racist ways that are privileges to you, and you know it. Mm-hmm. Because what did James Baldwin say? Of all the things that white people know, the one thing that they're for certain of is they would not want to be Black in America.
Right.
They know that.
Yeah.
Why? Because you know that we're being treated unjustly. So yes, race does matter. So when you say we're always playing the race card, you dealt the hand.
Yeah.
So we're playing the cards that you dealt to us.
Yep.
We want a different game.
Yeah, we didn't invent the shit.
We didn't invent the shit. We want a different game. We want to change the game. But I will also say to you, for those that comment, thank you. Because if you don't comment, silence is the worst form of racism there is. Mm-hmm. So we thank you for commenting. We thank you for participating. We thank you for feeling some kind of way about what we say or what other people say when they talk about Black history and they talk about the first Black or the second Black or the only Black. When you comment on it, you are helping us make this thing happen. So continue to do that. Thank you.
That's your alley-oop.
So yesterday at a basketball game, our team, we played Jefferson Forest. Team full of white boys, one Black kid. Our team full of Black kids with dreads. Just not gonna sugarcoat it. We are the best team, or the better team. And you know, the coach, the white coach, he was coaching when it was 7-7. I looked up, it was 15-7. He was no longer coaching. He knew it was over. So as the kids coming to the bench, they telling us like, and our kids, we get on them about, hey man, y'all just let anybody say stuff to y'all on the court, or y'all let anybody do stuff to y'all on the court. So we know it's not our kids that's ones that's out there talking. So call a timeout, kids come over there, they like, hey coach, they telling us we can shoot the fade after the game. So we laughing because we like, all right, whatever. So more kids start coming. Hey, they said after the game we could fight. So then one of the kids tell me that, hey, one of the kids bit me. I was like, that in a basketball game, that's crazy. Like, when you gonna get bit in a basketball game? So game ends, we smoke them. We're going through the handshake line, and I see one of our kids down there with the Black kid that's on their team. And the Black kid telling our kid, hey, we can go right now. So I get there just in time to grab our player who he was about to let the hands go. And I grabbed him and I walked him away. We over in the corner. We having our conversation like we always do. We dismiss. The head coach goes to the car to get himself together. And on the way out of the door, a white grandma of one of the kids that play on the team grabs his arm, tells him, hey, y'all played a great game, but you need to learn how to talk to kids. That upset him. So now I don't know what's going on. I'm inside. My wife comes to get me and say, hey, you might want to come out here and get Tony. By the time I get out there, the sun is in Tony's face. So I split them up. I'm solely going out there to diffuse the situation. I go out there. I'm like, bro, just chill out. And he like, well, he said something to my mom. I understand that. But your mom said something to him. What shouldn't have happened? Because that's a man at the end of the day. That's a woman at the end of the day. If she had something to say to him, then you should have been present when she said it. That way, if anything went left, you right there. But further along, if you're not gonna watch the next game, just leave. Y'all game over, just leave. All right, let me get my mom in the car. Get his mom in the car. He comes back and he just standing there on his phone, like he's like, yeah. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? Like, just leave. Meanwhile, here's the part that I didn't like was your son is sitting in the front seat of your truck watching all of it. And so after that, the mom pulls off, stops in the middle of the road, and comes back and says more stuff to Tony. At this time, Tony's calm. He's standing there. I'm telling her son, hey, just leave. He does the no to me, which is you look at me up and down. You can't do that. So now I'm like, bro, just get in your truck. He like, my truck is effing right here. I said, all right, get in it. Your son is looking at you. Get in the truck and leave. Again, a black man looking out for the betterment of a white man and his son.
That's right.
Because I wouldn't want my son to see me act like that. So now he gets in the truck. He's still talking. So I'm like, hey, take that elbow with you back to JF. And he looks at me dead in my face and says, I got something for you, boy. And at that point, I don't know who was out there because all I seen was red. I blacked out after that. My wife broke my jacket and all of that. And for me, it's like, at the end of the day, it's a basketball game that y'all didn't have no chance of winning anyway. But y'all kids is out here talking, but y'all want to say it was our kids because our kids are black with dreads, that you're already putting a label on them by saying, oh, it's them that's talking, when our kids didn't say anything. Right. We was just out there hooping what we do. It was y'all kids who felt like y'all privilege could get y'all over. It didn't get you in the basketball game, but it would get you outside of the basketball game. Your privilege felt threatened because you couldn't win a basketball game.
That's right.
And anybody knows, and maybe some white people don't know, but you can't call a black man a boy. That's the equivalent to nigga.
That's right.
That's a no-no.
And it's said with the intent for you to feel that way.
Right. Because after he said it, immediately he pulls off because now there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. And then like that's like a trigger word, you know, with nigger and boy and uncle and all of those words that came from white America to degrade a black person, because boy was just, and they would call slaves boys and girls even if they were grown men and women, because they didn't look at them as with the mental capacity of being an adult.
Right.
And even I even have a problem with the woman going up to Tony. For the people who don't know, the coach he's talking about locally is a person who is very, very hard on the children. And anybody that comes from the black community know there's a lot of coaches who are like that, because a lot of the kids don't have a father figure that talks to them that way, to make them have some type of
respect and order, discipline,
and accountability for what it is that they do. Now and that's what the balance is between that coach and the assistant coach right here, is because one of them can be the harsh one and the other one can kind of be the soothing one, which is important to have when it comes to children.
Have balance.
So when you talk about white America always saying discipline your kids, y'all need to raise your kids better, but when a black adult talks to the black children the way that they will understand, and the way that they will be able to respond to what it is that he's saying, all of a sudden you're saying that you shouldn't coach your kids like that. No, you said this one time, it was during a football game, and you said, look at the way that the kids respond to the black coach and how they're not responding to the white coach.
That's right.
And that's when it comes to coaching too, going back to what you were talking about, that a lot of athletes respond to other athletes that they feel that they have respect for. And a lot of kids respond to coaches who talk to them that way is because they understand that it's out of love.
That's right.
Right. So that's important for white America to mind their business when it comes to certain aspects like that.
That's right.
Because the other part people don't understand is, after our basketball games, Tony have his kids at his house. Then he has probably, out of the 9 and 10 and 11, 12 team together, which is 21 kids, he have about 10 of the players at his house for that weekend. So at the Super Bowl, both of the teams was at his house watching the Super Bowl, and one of the kids was like, hey, the whole team in. He was like, yeah, it's team bonding. So a lot of things that, like you said, our team is full of, I would probably say 75% don't got a dad in the house. They just got mom. So that's where me and Tony come in and play a pivotal role in these kids' houses. And not only in basketball, but in their houses, in school, and all these things. When they get in trouble, they don't tell their dad. They come tell us.
Right. And if it was a problem, trust me, the parents on that team would have said something if it was a problem.
And most of the parents want their kids to play for a coach.
And then you had just told me last week after the game that one of the players that coach knew or coached before didn't go shake the other team's hand. And he said, hey, go shake the other team's hand. And the coach got mad at him telling that player, and he told him, no, I got it. He on my team. It doesn't matter.
Right.
When you're talking about that age group, the person that knows that person, that has a rapport with that person, if you was the coach and he really listened to you, it wouldn't have been a conversation. Yep. So the fact that he had to tell one of your players to go shake the other team's hand shows the respect that he has for that individual that told him to do so.
That's right. You know, and Bobby Knight did it for years. At Indiana, coaching kids a certain way, talking to them a certain way. Nobody had a problem with it.
Right.
Even when the black players complained and said that he used racial slurs, nobody had a problem with it.
Yeah.
Until they grabbed one little white boy in the collar, and then that white boy never hit the court again for Indiana. All of a sudden, it became a problem. Right. But he did it. He made a career out of it.
Yeah.
We talk about Bobby Knight because of how he coached.
Right.
But it wasn't a problem until it happened to somebody white that people have said, hey, he should have did that. Now it's a problem.
And the crazy part is black people are, I think sometimes we're too forgiving, because at the end of the day, we in this parking lot and I'm like, only thing I can think of is, oh, your son is seeing this. When you're not even thinking about your son right now. Only thing you thinking about is being racist. You ain't even thinking about your son. How does racism go before your kid? Like, that's crazy to me.
It's been taught to them.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate nature of this whole cycle. You cannot have systemic racism unless it is taught, because you're not born that way. It is taught. And he was teaching his son that valuable lesson of the privilege. That's what he was doing. And again, that's what makes things like what we're doing important, is that we have to continue to talk about things like this so people pay attention to it. And at some point, and we've already seen it make great change. And I'm not saying it's to the point where it doesn't exist, because if it did, we wouldn't still be talking about it. It still exists, and it's still going to exist. But have things gotten better? Yeah. It has. Not at the rate you would like it, because you're still only talking about 100 years. It's not like we're talking about, 500 years that we've been at this thing, But it's going to take people to continue to talk about it so that you can get the people with the privilege to understand we're not threatening your privilege. We don't want to take what you have. We just want to be treated the same. That's it.
I have two things. I don't know which one I want to do.
Do both.
Let's just see where we're at with time after I do one. I want to talk about, I feel like we need to get to a place, and L.A. Reid said this in the interview, that, it's important for black people to control the music that they're able to put out. They can make the decisions about the music that they want to release to the public. And not the white man that run a lot of these record companies, because record labels will continue to give millions of dollars to young teenagers to make music about killing each other. And of course, if I'm 17, 18 years old and you want me to sign a record deal and you're going to give me an advance for $2 million, then yes, I'll make whatever record that needs to be made. But hip hop is still a baby when it comes to music genres. And I'm sure you can relate to this with being with jazz early on in his career. Is, in the 80s, I think they had a lot of difficulty understanding the business when it came to rapping, because that was one of the main things that people talked about. I want to get a record deal. I want to get a record deal. I want to get a record deal. Everybody wanted a record deal. But when it comes to a record deal is basically just a legal agreement between an artist and a record company. And basically it's saying that the label will finance your recordings, your distribution, and your marketing of the artist's music. And then the artist will sign for whatever amount of years. And in that time frame, you are to release this amount of music. So let's just say in 5 years, 3 albums, right? And recoup whatever it is that we're giving you. So they may give them advance, they may give them a little bit of money, and then they may sign them to, hey, this is your royalties. But normally, I'm not going to say no, most of the time, the label owns the actual master recordings of these records. The artists receive royalties from these sales of their music, depending on how they negotiate their contract, whether it's 2%, 5%, whatever the case may be.
Points.
Right.
It's based on points.
And then you get a license agreement, which gives another person or company permission to use an artist's work. So let's just say if a TV show decided to use your record for background music, or it comes on the radio or whatever, they reference the song, whatever, those are where licensing's coming in. And most of the time there's royalties on that too. But and then if you happen to own your own masters, let's just say if somebody wants to sample or cover your music, then your original recording will, and then also with streaming as well. So I think it's important to go back to the history of the pioneers who kind of paved the way to try to control some of the art that came from Black music. And one of the people was Harry Pace. Harry Pace is the first, created the first Black-owned record label. And this was back in the 1900s. So you're talking about the Harlem Renaissance era when Black music was thriving with blues and jazz. But most of the music was live music in the clubs or in the dance halls, because the white people owned the record labels and owned the recordings and the selling of music. And most of the time, if they was to sell artists from a Black demographic, it would be in a minstrel type of fashion. And if not, then we just won't record the Black artists. We'll just take the song that you're singing in the clubs,
some white artists to sing it,
and record it. So in 1921, Harry Pace started the Black Swan Records. And his biggest star was Ethel Waters. And Ethel Waters, in 6 months, in her first album, sold over 100,000 copies. And then again, I know this is Black history that we even got to say that, back then you had to go buy the record. For us, it's either going to Walmart or Target. You had music stores that you would buy records from. It wasn't streams and sales for our younger audience. Yes, we had to go physically purchase our music. Yes. But Harry Pace didn't just want to sign blues and jazz artists. He wanted to show diversity. So he also signed classical musical artists and orchestra singers. Even Lift Up Every Voice and Sing was recorded by Harry Pace. So the ownership of that record label goes to that record company. But the problem with the reason why the record company went down is white people seen how lucrative it was to sign Black artists. And they had more money, so they would just sign artists, pay them a little bit more money, and then jerk them in pennies later on. And then they also controlled the radio station. So a lot of Black-owned companies began to go under, including Black Swan Records. But Harry Pace's creativity and fortitude to control Black music led to people like Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke, who made timeless music like Change Is Gonna Come or Chain Gang. But he wanted to control his music. So he founded his own publishing company and launched his own record label. The first Black artist to actually do that. And in 1964, he was one of the few Black artists who crossed over to white audiences, but he would not perform for segregated audiences. So he had that type of control to where he can say, I'm not performing unless the audience is integrated. Then, of course, Sam Cooke was shot and killed at a hotel. And then there's some conspiracy about what happened that night. But a lot of people believe that his manager at the time, Alan Klein, was a part of the murder because he actually negotiated the deal with the record company to allow Sam Cooke to get the exclusive distribution rights. So he was getting a lot of money up front for his things. So when he died, guess who that money went to? So it went to his widow at the time, and then Alan Klein convinced her not to sell to anybody else. And then he ended up purchasing all of Sam Cooke's music for $350,000. For the people who don't know, in 2015,
What is it worth?
$100 million. That's owned now by Alan Klein's son. But Sam Cooke pushing that record label, again, pushed the envelope forward. And then you got people like Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was signed to Motown, another black record company who was called Hitsville. But Marvin Gaye during the 70s started to change a little bit because the world started to change. And he wanted to start talking about social issues, but Motown, Berry Gordy, them did not want their artists talking about social issues because they felt it was bad for the white audiences that were listening to Motown records. But Marvin Gaye wanted to record the album, one of the greatest albums of all time, and it ended up being What's Going On album, because his brother was in the Vietnam War. Of course, you had drugs at an all-time high, poverty at an all-time high. You had drug abuse at an all-time high. Police brutality at an all-time high. You can't expect me to sit here and sing and dance about love songs when this stuff is going on in the world.
Right.
And they were actually on a bus with the Four Tops and in California, I believe it was, and they witnessed police brutality. And Marvin Gaye said the black people ain't doing nothing but just standing there. They're not doing anything to be brutalized like this. What's going on? And that inspired the song What's Going On, to where Berry Gordy said this is the worst song ever. And he said it's never going to sell. We're not going to put this out. So they secretly put it out. They made 100,000 copies and secretly put it out to the radio stations. It sold out in 4 days. But that was Marvin Gaye ended up leaving Motown not too long after that. But that was him trying to get creative control over his own music, over the record labels. And then to one of your favorite artists, Prince, in 1992, he actually changed his name to a symbol because he had been fighting with record labels for mostly his entire career. He even called it like being a slave, where the record labels was the slave masters, and you were getting pennies for what it is, the art that you were putting out, that you were putting your blood, sweat, and tears into. And he tried to buy his masters back in 92 and Warner Brothers would not budge. So he told them, I will go back and re-record all my fucking music.
Yep.
And when I do that, it's going to be better than the original, and people are going to buy what I put out. So you can make a decision. And it was decades long of fighting back and forth with Warner Brothers before they eventually gave him his masters back. Well, he bought his masters back. And when he died, he was valued at $156 million. Imagine if he doesn't get those rights back, how much the record label controls. So his family could reap the benefits of his estate by them fighting for that musical control over these record labels. And then, of course, Michael Jackson, he paid $47 million to buy publishing of Sony ATV catalog. And when he realized when he bought that he bought, it also came with Little Richard's masters. And he realized how Little Richard's was getting paid pennies for his great work of starting rock and roll. And he gave Little Richard his masters back. So when we look at people like Jay-Z or even Kanye West, who can go on rant after rant after rant, pissing people off and do what he want to do, they can release their music however they want to release their music because they control the ownership of it.
That's right.
When you look at Nipsey Hussle and the way that he was able to control his music without having to deal with the record companies. When you look at Master P and his distribution deal, to not have to be worried about if they're going to jerk me or not. When you look at the performances of Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl and TDE with SZA and all of those people over there, black owned, that we can get on the stage and we can show our art without having to worry about the record company trying to shut it down, because it's ours. Beyonce can do that at halftime of the Super Bowl because it's our music, it's our culture. We own it, and we can do whatever it is that we want. We don't have to answer to anybody, and we need more people in the music business to begin to understand the ownership. I know when you first walk into those offices, and Joe's talk about it all the time. Joe said, I'm at the Knicks game and they playing Pump It Up every time out. I don't get paid from that. There are many artists who's talking about they're receiving checks for like $20 and $30. Meanwhile, their music is on TV shows you know, and they're not getting paid from this, because when you walk in those labels and they're willing, it's been the history of white owned companies to jerk you for pennies while they're making billions of dollars off of you. And they give you an advance and they'll let you go buy a car and buy your mom a house. And then in 10 years you broke and wonder why you're getting $20 checks for your royalties.
Absolutely.
And Marvin Gaye kept his masters, right? Because now, I mean, that's a thing in the industry.
So the record label bought Marvin Gaye's masters. His family owns the publishing.
Okay.
So remember, I think it was last year, I believe they sued Ed Sheeran for a song, which they ended up losing. But when you own your publishing,
they won the one against
Robin Thicke.
But I think they lost to Ed Sheeran, because when you own your publishing, that's pretty much the songwriting of it. So the melodies and all of that stuff. So when they say about Ed Sheeran, it was the melodies of his record was very, very similar to one of the records of Marvin Gaye. But I think the court said that it wasn't enough evidence to say that. So there, a lot of songwriters get publishing rights, which was a problem why Lauryn Hill never put out another album, is because those publishing rights on that Lauryn Hill album, there were a lot of other writers on there that left a lot of controversy. But when you got publishing rights, the songwriters get paid and they're able to control a lot of things that happen with that music.
But even with the I like that with the Marvin, because that's a thing in the industry where, hey, if it sounds anything close like Marvin Gaye, the Gaye family is coming.
Oh yeah, that's right. So, but that come with publishing rights. Y'all got anything on that? Or just on that entire concept?
I mean, I agree. You know, one of my favorite songs by one of my favorite artists, George Clinton, he doesn't get any money for Atomic Dog. He sold all of his rights to that song years ago, not realizing. He's totally oblivious to the business side of music. And so when you hear Atomic Dog and all the arenas that they play it, he doesn't get a dime for it. Now, years later, somebody bought the masters, and I think gave him his points back, I believe. But for years, he didn't get any money from it.
Yeah, because it's important too. Because when you listen to the music today, especially when you talk about ownership of the music, a lot of this stuff is just samples from stuff that came out when we came out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of TikTok videos where they're saying, oh, y'all know this song from this, but back in the 90s, early 2000s, this is where this record came from. So when you own your records, I mean, you don't ever have to make another record again.
Yeah. I give Master P a lot of props for changing how people in the rap industry look at the industry in whole, because he was the first millionaire off of music alone.
Yeah.
In the beginning, him and Juvenile, just with the idea of doing the distribution themselves.
Yeah.
They have 100% of distribution, so they were responsible for all the distribution and promoting of their work, and they got 100% of the money from that.
Yeah.
You know.
And you can release whenever you want. I mean, Master P was dropping an album every month.
Yeah. But also, that's one of the reasons why if you listen to Master P today, he said the worst investment is anything involving music, which is why he went to cereal.
Yeah,
and other things.
That's what Chameleonaire did. He invested in like tech industry. But when you look at TDE, that's why TDE, I mean, Kendrick Lamar was usually dropping an album once every 3-4 years. I mean, if you on a white record label, that's a no-no.
Yeah.
You got to drop every year.
I remember when Jazz first signed his first record deal with EMI Records. They didn't have a rap division.
Yeah.
They didn't have what we call urban music. They had no idea what to do with them. They had no rap division. And after he was signed, all these other record labels started creating rap divisions, bringing in what they call an A&R personnel just for rap music alone, because most record companies didn't know what to do with rap. They had no clue.
And I do have a movie review. I watched Nickel Boys. In this movie, Nickel Boys is actually shot in the first person. It's actually based off a book. And I'm going to get the book because the movie I thought was dope, but a lot of people said that it does. Of course, most people always say that the book is better. But the movie is shot in first person of two characters. So, and they'll show both sides of the, of both characters. Like, so they'll redo it from his angle and then do it again from his angle, which I thought was visually dope. My wife didn't like it, but I enjoyed it. I always enjoy
Yeah, that don't sound like Baruch.
I always enjoy creativity when it comes to watching certain movies. But it follows two African American boys who were sent to a reform school back in the 1960s. And without spoiling it, the real story is based off of Dozier Schoolboys, which was a reform school in Florida, where the kids were beaten, tortured, and sexually abused for decades. Now, both white and black children were sent to this reform school, but when they did the initial report back in like 2013, 2014, and it made news, they had like 5 of the white victims and like 1 of the black victims. So this book was written because it was like it really didn't do the black victims justification based off of what really happened, because it was segregated in the South. So the white students actually got better living conditions. They were their jobs was a lot better, so they was doing like vocational work with workshops and industry shops, where the black kids were put out in the fields, so they was either picking or planting out in the field. So just from that aspect, there was a lot different versus being black and white just in that reform school that the news didn't really cover at the time. So on the so they was doing brutal things like beating them with belts until they were bloody, torturing them, making them eat light bulbs, shit like that. So some kids were only there for simple stuff like trespassing or truancy from school, or again, going back to those vagrancy laws that we talked about, not just having nowhere to live. So you're talking about people who as young as 8 years old being put there. And then if you did technically graduate, they would sell you to an adult in town and you had to work off of debt. So that goes back to that convict leasing system that was going on in the South as well.
Tell me again what state that was.
This is Florida.
Yeah.
This is Florida. Yeah. But in 2014, after they did another investigation, they found 55 remains unaccounted for, buried out there in their on their property. Some with gunshot wounds and some with blunt force trauma. One was George Smith, who was sent to the reform school for riding in a stolen car when he was 14. In 1940, school officials wrote his parents that he ran away when he really died from pneumonia. Because if there's a death that you have to basically put out there, then of course you're going to be investigated. But between 1914 and 1973, 96 boys died at that camp. And again, that goes back to movies like Life, right? Most people look at it as a comedy, but Life is a real life story about what was going on in the South on the chain gang. And when you look at a lot of those institutions in the South, like this reform school, there was a lot of things being done that was very, very slave-like. You know, it was slavery by another name. And I think it's important. So go check that movie out, The Nickel Boys. I believe it's in theaters. I watched it on the Fire Stick. But dope movie, dope concept, and I'm going to get the book at Barnes & Noble this week.
I got just some black headlines real quick. Jalen Hurts joins Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson and Doug Williams as the only black quarterback to win the Super Bowl. Right. An associate performance coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, Autumn Lockwood, becomes the first black woman, they go that first again, to win a Super Bowl as a coach.
Right.
And lastly, Asia Wilson's grandmother grew up near the University of South Carolina campus, but wasn't even allowed to walk on it. Instead, she had to take longer routes to avoid the campus. Today, her granddaughter Asia has both a statue and a retired jersey at the same school.
Absolutely. That's dope. We appreciate y'all. We love y'all. Peace.
Good.